What is up, my dashing dudes? I am the Hans TV, and do you want to know what happens when you mess with an ant farmer? Because I sure do. Let's find out together in today's episode of r/NuclearRevenge. Our first story for the day comes from Sanity Contagion. Years of drunken abuse result in a blanket party. My aunt was an intensive care nurse at a hospital in Texas for 30 years. This is her story. A while back, my aunt tells me and my cousins this story, probably as a warning about drinking, I guess. For years, Mrs. Smith would come into my aunt's ER, battered and bruised, apparently sometimes quite severely. The woman was getting up there in years and had almost monthly visits that sometimes required her to stay for a week or more. A quick rundown of some of the injuries I recall. Broken pelvis, explained by falling downstairs in her one-story home. Broken arms, wrists, explained as falling out of her car. A shattered orbital bone in her eye socket, no explanation that I can recall. A series of broken ribs, various excuses. Lastly, this dipstick broke her back, which required fusing 3 of her vertebrae. Driveway car accident. So, Mr. Smith is appropriately qualified as a total piece of garbage. On the end of my aunt's 12-hour shift, the call comes in from the ambulance that they are bringing in a 70-year-old Smith. Faces fell. Everyone gets somber knowing that Mrs. Smith probably won't survive the night due to the years of beating she's already endured. The ER calls the ambulance back, asking for a description of the injuries so the OR can be somewhat prepared. What they heard on the radio pissed everyone off. The paramedics were completely unprofessional. They were laughing their butts off as they described broken arm, broken leg, and lacerated scalp. When the ambulance pulls up, my aunt and several other ER staff are trying to read them the riot act. Instead, Mrs. Smith primly stepped out of the ambulance. The paramedics pull the stretcher out of the ambulance and wheel her husband inside. Enough is enough. Apparently, that's all she said. The paramedics had to fill in the rest of the story. So, here it is. Mr. Smith came home drunk one last time, and she wrapped him in a blanket and beat him with a cast iron frying pan. Mr. and Mrs. Smith never came back to the ER. Maybe he learned. TLDR, abused elderly woman returns the favor. What can I say except Mr. Smith got what was coming to him? Mrs. Smith gave him a dose of his own medicine. Our next story comes from throwaway 665544654. Cheating wife gets wiped out in divorce. Found my best friend's wife's secret social media account. She was sleeping with one of our other friends. I told my friend about it. He just kind of shut down. A few weeks later, he told me never to tell anyone I knew she was cheating or that I knew about the account. I would casually ask him how the two of them were doing every now and then. Always, great. Every time I saw them together, they were a happy couple. 9 months later, he confessed he had lost everything they had to a gambling addiction. A year before, they both had cars that were paid off. He had sold them and leased new cars. The money he made selling them, he lost to gambling. Their savings and 401ks were essentially gone, all lost on gambling. The condo they lived in was rented. They had essentially no assets. She immediately filed for divorce. They had no kids, similar incomes. Divorce was finalized without him owing alimony. Her cheating was never brought up. She got all the furniture and pots and pans. He kept his secret hoard of gold coins. I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing it's at least 200,000 worth. Edit. TLDR, wife cheats. He fakes a gambling addiction to cover up wiping out everything they own and hides the money in gold coins. This was a really smart man. Taking out everything that he had and releasing cars, selling everything, and putting it all in gold, that was a fantastic idea. Seeing as they had no assets, she didn't have anything to take in the divorce, so he got to keep basically everything that was his, besides the furniture and the pots and pans. Our next story comes from Totes33. Supervisor takes credit for my work. I cause entire production to shut down. I started working in a machine shop after I finished school with a 2-year degree in machining. Learned all kinds of programming techniques that could make most machines that were less than 30 years old perform moves, and output measurements of parts currently in the machine to automatically perform quality control. This greatly increases the quality of parts as well as reduces waste and human error. I also learned many tricks along the way to make sure that my work could not be stolen. It was my first day on the machine shop floor, and I immediately noticed inefficiencies in all the machines in my station. We had to manually perform quality control, sacrificing production time, while also leaving tons of room for human error. Due to the poor quality of measuring instruments in the shop, I'm new and eager to prove I'm worth more than the original pay they offered. I told my supervisor to let me spend an hour to add a line of code to a machine to demonstrate my skills I learned in school that would immediately cut scrap waste down by a large portion without slowing production rates on the line. My immediate supervisor humored me, thinking I was BSing him to try and brown-nose the engineers and lead programmers so I could get brownie points or something. Quick backstory note, I had zero experience in a production plant, and said supervisor had 30 years experience in the field. He had a very proud attitude, and genuinely worked very hard to learn what he knew. He was decent to work with, but when I asked questions about some of the basics on this machine, like how to get to the program so I could edit it, he would block my view of what he was doing and get to the end result quickly without explaining the process. Being new, and wanting to learn, I'd always ask to have him show me what he did. He always refused and claimed it was his way of securing his job. Anyway, I programmed the function into the machine in about 2 hours, 40 minutes, and when it comes time to demonstrate the process, it catches a part that is out of tolerances according to the blueprint. I also programmed the machine to output different messages, providing instructions to whoever the operator was on ways to resolve the issue if the part couldn't be salvaged, or to automatically adjust offsets of the tool that machined the feature that was found to be out of tolerances and rerun said operation, and recheck said feature to ensure quality. All of these functions were performed automatically without any input from an operator. This is a pretty magnificent feature to have in production, and my supervisor knew that. The supervisor who observed the demo immediately went to report this to the higher-ups, who came to view the new feature I'd implemented. As the next part was being produced, the quality check move initiated and found that the second part was also bad, and output a message to change tools X, Y, and Z. The managers were incredibly surprised that this was all done on an 18-year-old machine, and they looked at my supervisor to ask how he figured it out. Long story short, he took the credit and was given a raise on the spot. It didn't register to me that that's what happened until I went to ask if he was going to credit me for my work. He said, "Yeah, but you gotta put in the time to get to where I'm at. It don't matter that you did the job, because without me, you never would have known how to do your fancy programming in the first place." The managers had left for the day, so I couldn't fight my case right then. The next day, I was planning on informing the managers that I was the one who did the programming to do that. The managers were also former machine shop veterans with 20 plus years in the workplace and refused to believe me. Not only that, they basically yelled at me for trying to steal credit from someone who has worked their way up in the company and learned everything on their own and not from some school. I went to my station even more pissed now, where I was met by my supervisor. He told me that I needed to go around to all the machines that could perform the function and add it to the code. I said, "Not without a raise. My code saves you guys tons and brings the bottom line to a level that McDonald's qualified workers could produce infinite numbers of parts with minimal loss." He said if I didn't do it, I would be fired. So I faked my compliance and started to change the code on all the machines. If you know anything about programming, you know you can make something function a certain way until a certain value is met, and then have it completely change afterwards. This was my job security. So I set the quality check up on 18 machines the first day, then the last 30 that weekend. And the managers were praising the supervisor uncontrollably for his innovation. Well, the programs were all set to operate as normal and do quality checks like I programmed the original machine. However, I programmed the rest of the machines to keep track of a new variable. They would run and self-check just fine, until they reached a random number of parts produced, 50 to 500 depending on the production time of the parts run on each machine, where it would then throw up an error code that would only be cleared with the password I had set for it. If a wrong password was provided or someone just hit the enter/reset button, the machine would take its largest tool in the turret and run it rapidly into the solid chuck at maximum RPMs. I made it so that about 60 to 75 hours of production would go smoothly before my job security would kick in. It took 3 days for the machines to hit their magic values, but when they did, boy oh boy was it magically satisfying. The first machine to crash was making parts for the drivelines of a major motor company. The crash was caused while a new operator was running the machine, who, I might add, was only hired because the program I made let them hire clueless people into the shop and be able to still produce good parts. When he tried to clear my password code, the lathe started turning at 2500 RPMs with a large heavy drive shaft base in the holder, switched to a huge drill and ran the drill into the holder, causing the tool holder to be knocked off axis, the part holder and tools to be destroyed, as well as cost the company tons to get someone from the machines maintenance team to come out to repair it. After the first glorious crash, I menacingly mentioned to the supervisor, "You should check your codes to make sure they're working properly." He went ghost white. Not a second after, 3 more machines simultaneously crash in glorious fashion. He starts to chew me out, saying I'm in huge trouble, but as he starts cursing, the managers are there to have him go diagnose the problem with his code. The supervisor, not wanting to admit he stole my work, doubles down and says confidently, "I know what the problem is," and he walks off to the crash machines. Not a minute after they turn a corner, more machines start crashing. I just sit idly by and listen to the glorious sound of my NuclearRevenge playing out. A few minutes later, all the workers are told to stop production completely. We are all kept in the shop until they can figure out the problems. This is a 24-hour production facility with 3 shifts of workers coming in 7 days a week, mind you. Our shift is nearly over, and we've all been idle for about 7 hours. The next shift comes in, and we leave for the day. I hear nothing from the shop, so I just go in the next day as normal. Turns out, they tried to fire machines back up during the night shift, and 18 more machines crashed like the others. The plant did a formal layoff of most of the workers the next week, as they were hemorrhaging money from all the damaged machines on top of labor paid without any production. We filed a class action suit against the company for unemployment, lost vacation time, dangerous work conditions due to the severity of the crashes, etc. The company went bankrupt from the lawsuits and losses in production/machine repairs. The guy who took my credit was obviously fired and had an article in the paper written about him sabotaging the company's production. He obviously told them I was responsible for the crashes, but the company found out that the code to my password program was his name. They believed he did this out of spite because he was refused a raise the previous year and his threats to them after his last evaluation. Sucks to suck, lol. Edit. To all in the comments worried about the innocent workers, they were given 2 months severance pay on top of being able to collect unemployment for 16 weeks. The severance pay outlined by the lawsuit took into account all the benefits the employees had before getting laid off. I do feel guilty that there was collateral damage. However, most of the employees ended up with the equivalent of about 6 months paid vacation, so there is a happy ending. I honestly didn't think the company would continue to try and run these machines when all the ones my supervisor took claim to programming were crashing. That was their fault/greed trying to make money instead of fixing the problems before continuing production, in my opinion. Edit 2. It was 18 machines the first day and 15 a day the following 2 days. Don't steal credit for something that somebody else did, especially if they're smarter than you, because it will always come back to bite you. Our final story for today comes from Frumpy Fungus. You shouldn't mess with an ant farmer. Some backstory. When I was about 11 or 12, I started to get hobbies which included rock collecting and ant farming. Important later, I also started babysitting my brother at the time. So, it was a normal Saturday that consisted of me babysitting my little brother, taking care of my ants. I was letting my brother play on my PS3 until the doorbell rang. I opened it and saw these annoying little kids that always asked if I could play, but every time I would say no. Normally, they would just leave, but this time, they just sat there and just kept on ringing the doorbell. It went on for about 10 minutes until it stopped. I thought it was over until I heard them start giggling, then they started throwing rocks at my house. They even cracked one of the windows. I opened the door and they just knew it wasn't going to be good. Also, at the time, I was probably about 5'9", so I was kinda scary. I walked outside and told them to go home or I'll call the police. Fast forward about 2 weeks and it happened 3 more times. At this point, I was done playing around. I knew they were gonna do it again, so at the side of my house where they were getting the rocks, I had accidentally spilled my fire ant geranium with probably about 1,500 to 2,000 fire ants on the rocks. So the next day comes around and the little brats were ringing my doorbell, and I could almost taste it. Sweet, sweet revenge. After the ringing stopped, I heard the thuds of the rocks hitting my house. All of a sudden, it stopped. and I could hear them start to cry. I looked out the window, and the little boy was sitting right on the rocks. They all ran home. Oh, but it's not over. Their mom came out of the house and over to mine. I put on my saddest face and told the mom, "They broke my ant farm." After that, the mom gave me $10 and I never saw them again. I'm almost starting to feel bad, but they shouldn't have messed with my rocks. A few weeks later, they started doing things like taking toys from my backyard, ringing our doorbell, and stealing our rocks. I told their parents, but they just kept on doing it, even after the fire ants, and this time I was so mad, I didn't hold back. I took one of my book bags and filled it with Legos, balls, dolls, etc. But that wasn't it. I had one of my subterranean termite farms and emptied it into the bag. I gently put my book bag in the grass and waited. I went to feed my brother lunch, and when I came back, it was gone. Fast forward a couple of months, and their house was on quarantine for being infested with bugs. Karma is a witch. I also wasted almost $500 worth of bugs. Alright, my dashing dudes, that is going to do it for today's episode of Nuclear Revenge. Thank you to everyone who subscribed in the past few days, and if you haven't, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment down below with what you'd like me to read next. Suggestions are done on Friday. But with that being said, I'll see you in the next video.